Hello there. Let's talk about jump statements in Java. Now, Java supports three jump statements and they are break, continue, and return. In this video, we will talk only about break and continue, and we will keep the discussion of return on hold because return is used to explicitly return from a method. So it only makes sense to talk about the return statement once we have got a good understanding of method in Java. So with that said, let's continue and let's talk about break and continue, starting with break. Now we've used break already, right? We had used break with switch statement where what we had done was we had ended each of the case with the break keyword. And this was done to avoid the situation of fall through, where what happens is, assuming that in this example, operator evaluates to plus, which means it will match with this case. Then these two statements will be evaluated, right? And if break is not present, for example, what would happen is after the sum is printed, the control would move to the next case and would evaluate the statements in that case as well. And to avoid that, we had used the break keyword. Now, of course, fall through is desirable in some cases, and we have discussed that as well. So, break can be used to terminate a sequence in switch statement, and break can also be used to exit a loop. And since we already know about the first point, what are we going to do next is talk about the second point. Now we know that there are three different loops or iteration statements in Java, and they are while, do while, and for. But in general, this is what any iteration statement would look like. We will have a condition and a body associated to it. Now, what happens is, as long as the condition is true, the body is evaluated, right? So the next question is, where does break fit into this? Now, break, like any other statement, would be in the body that is associated to the loop. So for example, if I keep break over here, what is going to happen is, assuming that the condition is true, the statements would start getting evaluated one by one. And when the control reaches break, what is going to happen is the break keyword or the break statement would force the control out of the loop. That means the loop will be terminated even if the condition would have been true in the next iteration. Now, to understand this better, let's go to IntelliJ and let's write some simple programs. And the first thing that I'll do is close this. And as you can see, I already have a package called jump statements created. And the next thing that I'll do is create a Java class, and I'm going to name this as break with while example. Now over here, let me have public static void main first, and then let me write a very simple program using while loop. So the first thing that I'll do is create a variable called I, initialize it to 0, and then I'll say while I less than 10, system.out.println I, and then I'll say I plus plus. Now you already know what the output will be if I run this code, right? If I run this, I expect 0 to 9 printed here, which is exactly what's happening. So now let me introduce break to this while loop. So as we know, break can be put in the body of the while loop like any other statement, right? Which means break can be present here, that is as the first line inside the while loop. Break can be present somewhere in between the many lines that are there in the while loop, or break can be present at the very end. So if I put break over here, what is going to happen? Well, if I run the code, we will get only 0 printed over here. And the reason for that is I is initialized to 0. And because I is 0, this condition is true. And because this condition is true, the control would get inside the body of the loop. And the first line in the body of the loop is printing the value of I. So 0 will get printed. And then next, the value of I will be incremented to 1, right? And then break is getting encountered, because of which what's happening is the control is being forced out of the loop. So to prove this to you, let me print the value of I here. And then if I run the code now, what do we expect to happen? We expect I to be initialized to 0, and then this condition to be true, because of which 0 will be printed, and then I will be incremented to 1. And because of break, the control would come out of the loop. And because we have got a println statement on line number 13, 1 will be printed. Now let me also put this over here. So if I run the code, this is what we are getting. We are getting 0 because of the system.out.println we have inside the while loop. and then these 3 dashes or hyphen is getting printed, and then it is printing the value of I, which is 1. Now, similar to putting break over here, we can put break anywhere else in the body of the while loop. For example, here. But if I do this, you see that we are getting an error. And if I hover on this, it will say unreachable statement. Because what happens in the process of compilation is the compiler assesses if each and every statement that we have in the code can be reached or not. But in this case, what will happen is, because we have got a break after printing the value of I, which would be 0 in that case, it would break out of the loop, which means the control would never reach I++. And that is why we are getting an error. And the same thing would happen if I move break to the first line inside the while loop. So putting just the break keyword at the very end is absolutely fine, although it is of no use because the loop would iterate only once. And if we have a loop iterating only once, we are good without the loop too, right? But continuing on this, we can have break at the end without any problems. But the moment we put break anywhere else inside the body of the while loop, we will get an error, and that error will say unreachable statement. And like I said, if we do this, it is as good as not having a loop. So what would you find in most of the real life use cases is, and I think in all of the real life use cases is, break will be surrounded with a selection statement, something like this. So let me go here and let me say if I is equal to 5 and then I put break. So as you can see, there's no error right now, even if break is present before any other statement in the body of the while loop. And this is happening because putting break over here is absolutely fine because it is governed by a condition, and that condition is I equal to 5. So all of these statements can be reached when the program executes. So now if I run the code, let's see what happens. We are getting 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 printed, and then we have got 3 dashes or hyphen, and then we have got 5 at the end. Now, let me explain why is this the output of this piece of code. For that, let's come back over here and let's take a look at the code. So the first line of the code is int I is equal to 0. And what is this going to do is create a variable called I and initialize 0 to it. Then there's a condition which says while I less than 10. And since I is 0, I less than 10 is true. So it will get inside the body of while loop, and the first few statements in the body of while loop is checking a condition where it says I equal to 5, and if it is true, it will get inside the body of if. But because I is 0, this condition is false and if will not be executed. So it will print the value of I, which is 0 at the moment, and then it will increase the value of I by 1. So I will be 1. And then it will go for the next iteration, right? So over here, I is less than 10. Because it is 1, it is still true. So it will check this condition. This is false. So it will print the value of I, which is 1. And then it will increase the value of I. So I will be 2 now. Then this will continue. And the next time, 2 will be printed, after which the value of I will increase to 3, and then 3 will be printed, and then the value of I will increase to 4, and then 4 will be printed. And then the value of I will increase to 5, which will happen over here, right? Because it first prints and then increases the value of I. So it will print 4 and then will increase the value of I to 5. Now it will come back over here. It will check the condition 5 is less than 10, right? So it will get inside the body of while loop. And the first few statements here is checking another condition. And it is if I equal to 5. And this time I is equal to 5, right? So because this condition is true, the body of if will get executed. And the body of if contains only one statement, which is break. And because we have got break over here, it will force the termination of the while loop, which means the control would come out from here all the way up to the statement that is immediately after the while loop. And the statement immediately after the while loop is 3 hyphens or 3 dashes. So this is what will get printed. And then the value of I will get printed, and the value of I here is 5. So that's why we are getting this as the output. So I hope this is clear. Now, if this is clear, let's move on and let's use break with the do while loop. So we'll say break with do while example. And over here, we will have public static void main. And let's write the same code that we did over here. So first of all, let me put it this way. So I'll say int I is equal to 0, and then I'll say do, and I'll say if I equal to 5, break. And here I'll say system.out.println I. And then I'll say I plus plus. And here I'll say while I is less than 10. And I'll end this and I'll copy these two statements from here and I'll paste it here. Now, the same things that we have discussed about the position of break in while loop holds true for do while loop as well. So for example, if I, let's say, get rid of this for now, and what I do is the first statement in the do is break. We will get an error and the error will say unreachable statement. But if we put this statement at the end of the body of do, there's no error, right? So let me revert it back to this state. Now, what is the output that we expect when we run this code? When we run this code, it will first of all check if I is equal to 5 or not. And because we have initialized it to 0, I will not be equal to 5, which means it will not break. And it will print 0. It will then increment. And then it will check over here. And this cycle would continue. So let's run the code and check the output. And we are getting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 3 dashes, and then 5. And 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is because of this part of the code, right? And the 3 dashes is because of this. And lastly, 5 is getting printed because what happened was I got increased to 5 and then the condition was checked. And at that time, the condition was true. Because the condition was true, the body of if got executed and the body had break. And because the body had break, the control was forced out of the do while loop and it landed over here, that is on line number 15. So the explanation of the output for this example is the same or almost the same as this example, and almost the same because this is do while loop and this is while loop. And we already know the difference between the do while loop and the while loop, right? Do while loop will check the condition at the end, but while loop checks the condition at the beginning. But either way, the explanation of this would be the same as this. So I'm not dry running the code, but I highly recommend that you do so that you get a better understanding of the code, which is pretty simple, but more importantly of how to dry run the code. That is, how do you follow the code that is written and determine what the output would be at the end. So with this clear, let's move on and let me close these first. Let me expand this and let me create another class. And as you would have expected, this class would contain an example of using break with the for loop. So let me say this, break with for example. And what am I going to do here is put public static void main, and I'm going to have this for int I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, and I'm going to print the value of I. And if I run this code, you know what the output would be, right? We will get 0 to 9 printed on the screen. So let's run the code and check for ourselves. And that's exactly what we got, right? Now, if I throw in the break statement over here, again, if I throw in the break statement as the very first statement in the loop, I get an error, and the error is familiar. It says unreachable statement. But if I bring this to the end of the body of the loop, there's no error. Of course, it will just iterate only once, which is as good as not having the loop itself. But anyway, like we had discussed, what am I going to do here is I'm going to have break at the start of the body of the loop. But that break will be governed by a condition, like we had it with the example that we had taken earlier, right? So if I run the code, you know what the output would be, right? But I forgot something, which is these two statements. So let me copy this and let me paste them over here. And as expected, we are getting an error on line number 13. And that's because we have declared I in the for loop, which means I cannot access I outside of the for loop, right? To fix that, what we can do is we can have int I over here, and then I can get rid of the declaration in the for loop. Now you see that the error has vanished. So if I run the code now, what do you expect as the output? We expect 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 getting printed. And then the value of I would be 5, and 5 is less than 10. So it would come inside the for loop and it will come across this condition. And this condition will be true. Because this condition is true, break keyword will be encountered, and that will force the control to go out of the for loop, right? So if I run the code, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 getting printed, and then we have got the 3 hyphen or dashes, and then we have got 5. So this is how we can use break in the for loop. Now with this discussed, let's talk about the use of break in nested loop. For that, let me create a new Java class and let me call this class as break with nested loop. And here I'll have a public static void main. And what am I going to do is I'm going to create a nested loop. I'll say for int I equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. And then I'll say inside the body of this loop that is controlled by the variable I, I'll say int j is equal to 0, j is less than 10, j plus plus. And here I'll say system.out.println I plus a space plus j. So if I run the code, you know what the output would be, right? It would be 0, 0, then 0, 1, 0, 2, all the way up to 0, 9, and then 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, all the way up to 1, 9, and it will go all the way up to 9, 9. So that's exactly what is happening, right? And if I scroll to the very end, we see 9, 9. Now let me modify this program a little bit so that it is easier for me to explain the usage of break in nested loop. So what am I going to do here is I'll print just j and I'll copy this, paste it here, I'll say I. And to make it easier to understand which value is getting printed, I'll also print a message. So I'll say I colon and then the value. Similarly over here, I'll say j colon and then the value. So now if I run the code, let's check what the output is. And the output is this. I is 0 first, and then j is 0 to 9. And then I is 1, and then j is 0 all the way up to 9, and so on till the very end where I is 9 and j is from 0 to 9. Because what's happening is for every iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop is getting iterated 10 times, starting from 0 to 9. And the outer loop is also getting iterated 10 times, starting from 0 to 9. Now let me introduce break keyword over here. So we know that break keyword can be used to exit a loop. But over here, we've got two loops, one inside another. So the next question is, where can we put break? The answer to that is you can put break anywhere. That means you can put break inside the inner for loop, that is the for loop governed by j, or you can put the break keyword inside the outer for loop, that is the for loop governed by I. So let me put break keyword here first, that is inside the inner for loop. So if I say if I equal to 5 break, actually let's make it if j equal to 5. And if I run the code now, let's see what is the output that we get. So we get I0 and then J0 to 4. And then we get I1 and then J0 to 4. Similarly, I2, J0 to 4 and all the way up to I9 and then J0 to 4. So let me explain what's going on over here. So we have got nested loop, right? What's happening is in the first loop, we've got the loop control variable I, and for the second loop, we've got loop control variable j. So I will be initialized to 0. And once that is done, it will check if I is less than 10 and I is less than 10. So it will get inside the body of the outer for loop, where the first thing that it will do is print the value of I. So let me write the output over here. So it will print I colon 0. Then for the inner loop, j will be initialized to 0 and then the condition would be checked. So j is less than 10. And since j is less than 10, the body will be executed. And in the body, it will check for a condition which will be false because j is 0, but the condition is j equal to 5. So this won't be evaluated, and the control would reach here, which will say j colon and then the value of j. So it will be j colon 0 because that's what the value of j is, right? Then it will go for the next iteration where it will first of all increase the value of j to 1, then it will check the condition and then get inside the body. And because this is false, it will print j1. So j1 gets printed, and then the value of j will increase to 2. It will then print j2, then it will increase to 3. It will print j3, then to 4. It will print j4. At this point, this is where the control would be, right? Because it has just printed j colon 4. So it will go here, that is j plus plus, which will increase the value to 5. And once j is 5, it will check if j is less than 10 or not, and it is. So the body will be evaluated. And this time, this condition would be true. And because this condition is true, the body of if will be evaluated, which contains break. And this break will force the control out of the loop. Now the question is, which loop? Will it force the control out of the inner for loop, which is being governed by j, or the outer for loop, which is being controlled by I? The answer to that is this break would force the control out of the loop in which it is present. So it is present in inner for loop. That is the one that is controlled by j. So the control will be forced out of the inner for loop, which means it will reach over here. And reaching over here means there's no more statement in the outer for loop, right? So the outer for loops iteration would end there, and it will go for the next iteration where it will increase the value of I to 1. And then it will check if I is less than 10 or not, and it is. So it will get inside, print the value of I like this, and then the inner for loop would start again. So it will then say, sorry, this would have been 1. So j would be 0, and then j would be 1, and then all the way up to 4, after which the value of j would be 5. This would be true, but then this would also be true. And because this is true, the control would be forced out of the inner for loop. And that's why when we run this code, this is what we get: I0 and j from 0 to 4, then I1 and j 0 to 4, all the way up to I9 and j 0 to 4. So that is how break works with while loop, do while loop, for loop, and nested loop. Now let me quickly give an example of what would happen when we have got a loop and a switch statement and break is present in switch statement. So for that, let me write a small piece of code. Let me name this class as break with, say, for loop and switch statement. So before I run the code, pause for a moment and tell me what the output would be. And now, assuming that you have done that, let me run the code and check the output. So if I run the code, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, and greater than 3 6 times. So to explain why the output is this way, what would happen is I will be 0, right? And because I is 0, I less than 10 is true. And because I less than 10 is true, this will get evaluated. It will say switch 0. So what would happen is it will go to case 0, where it will print 0, and then break would be encountered. So this break won't break out of the loop, because if that would have been the case, after printing 0, nothing would have got printed, right? But that is not the case, because of which we can be pretty sure that the break keyword over here in the switch statement will break out of the body of switch and not out of the body of the for loop, right? So what would happen next is it will first of all print 0. It will then break, which means out of the body of switch. It will go for the statement that is after the body of switch, and there's none. So it will go for increment here. I will become 1 and 1 is less than 10. So this is true. It will get inside. then this time it will be case 1, which prints 1, right? So it will print 1, and then the next iteration it will print 2, and then 3, and so on. So if we have got a for loop and we've got a switch and there's a break present in the body of switch, that break will force the control out of the body of switch and not out of the body of for, right? Oh, and I nearly missed. Let's go back to the break with nested loop. So over here, we have discussed a case where break is present in the inner for loop. But what would happen if break is present in the outer for loop? So for that, let me copy this main method. Let me create a new class. Let's name this as break with nested loop 2. And here I'll paste whatever I had copied there, and I will cut this part and I will paste that over here. That is in the outer for loop. And instead of j equal to 5, I'll say I equal to 5. And if I run the code, what do you expect as the output? Well, let's find out. And what we get is this. We get I0 and j from 0 all the way up to 9, and then I1 and then j 0 all the way up to 9, and so on all the way up to I4, but j 0 to 9. And lastly, we're also getting 5 printed, but none of the values of j is getting printed. So let me explain what's going on over here. For that, let's come back over here. And here we've got 2 loops controlled by I and j. Now, I will be initialized to 0 and 0 is less than 10. So the body of the outer loop will be evaluated. And the first statement over here is printing the value of I. So let me put the output here. So it will say I colon 0. And then this condition will be checked, which is false. So it will come over here. And here we have got another loop going from 0 all the way up to 10, not including 10. And in each of the iteration, it is printing the value of j. So we already know what the output of this would be, right? It would be j 0 and then j1 all the way up to j9. And then j will become 10. Once j becomes 10, this condition is false. Because this condition is false, the loop ends and it goes to the next iteration of the outer loop, which means the value of I will increase to 1. And the same thing would follow. So we'll get I 1, then j 0 to 9, and then it will continue. And this will continue till the value of I equal to 4. So we will get I 4, j0, j1, and so on up to j9. And then once this loop ends, it will increase the value of I to 5. So I will be 5. And this time also, this condition is true, which means the body of the loop will be evaluated and the first line in the body of the outer loop is printing the value of I. So it will say I colon 5. And after this, it is checking a condition. The condition is I equal to 5. And since I is equal to 5, this will be true. And because this is true, break keyword will be encountered and this will force the control out of the outer loop. So that is why we are getting I0 and then J0 to 9, then I1, J0 to 9, and all the way up to I4, J0 to 9. And lastly, only I colon 5 is getting printed. So with this clear, let's continue and let's talk about continue. And continue is used to force an early iteration of the loop. Now let me explain what happens here. So again, if we take a loop into consideration, we'll have a condition and a body. Just like break, continue can come anywhere in the body of the loop. So let's say the loop starts because the condition is true. It will execute the first statement, then the second, then the third, and then the fourth, all the way up to the point where we get continue. And if this continue is encountered, what would happen is the control would go to the next iteration. That means every statement after continue will be skipped for that iteration. To explain this better, let me create a Java class with the name continue with while example. And here I'll have a main method. And here I'll say int I equal to 0. And then I'll say while I is less than 10. And I'll say system.out.println I, and then I'll increment the value of I. Now, just like break, we can put continue anywhere in the body of the loop. So if I put continue at the very end, not a problem. Of course, it is not useful because, like we know, continue would take the control to the next iteration, skipping every statement that is after the continue statement. So here, there's no statement after continue. And even if this continue statement was not here, because we are at the end of the body of while, the control would have anyway got to the next iteration. Now, what would happen if I move this to the top of the body? And as you can see, we are getting an error and it will be familiar, which is unreachable statement. And like break, continue is also used with selection statement. For example, if. So if I say, if I is equal to 5, continue. Now, what do you expect would be the output of this code? Let's come back here and try to understand. So I will be 0. Now, this is true, but this is not. So I will be printed. So we'll get 0 printed. And then I will be incremented. So this will be 1. And then again, this is true, but this is not. So it will print 1. So we will get 1. And then this will increase to 2. We will get 2. This will increase to 3. We will get 3. And this will increase to 4. And we will get 4. Now, after 4 is printed, the value of I will be increased. So we will get the value of I as 5. And this time, this condition is true. And this condition is true as well. So what's going to happen? Because I is equal to 5 is true, the control would get inside the body of if. And in the body of if, we have got continue. So the control would go from here to the next iteration, which means the value of I will remain 5 and the control would come over here at the condition and this will be true. And it will get inside and it will keep on doing that. So when we run the code, we expect to reach a point where the code gets into an infinite loop, right? So to fix this, what we can do is we can take this, that is I++, and we can put it over here. So what will happen is when I is equal to 5, I will get increased to 6, and then the continue statement is encountered, because of which the control goes back to the condition part of the loop. And because I is 6, 6 is less than 10, this is true. And this time this will be false because we are checking if I equal to 5 or not. And this time the value of I is 6 and not 5. So if I run the code now, what do we expect? We expect 0 to 9 getting printed except 5. So let's see if that's what we are getting. And that's exactly what we're getting. We got 0 to 4, as in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is how continue would work. Now let me quickly demonstrate how continue would work with do while loop. So over here, I'll say continue with do while example. And let's have public static void main. And let's grab this, paste it here. And let's say do, and let's grab all of this, paste it here. And let's grab the while, paste here, and end. Now, if I run the code, what do you expect as the output? The output would be similar to the one that we got over here, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 got skipped, and then 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is how continue would work with the do while loop. What would happen when continue is encountered? It will go to this section, it will check the condition, and then depending on whether the condition is true or false, it would either get inside the body of do while loop or the loop would terminate entirely. Now, let's close these and let's create another class. And as you might have guessed, this would be continue with for example. And here we will say for int I equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, and here we'll say system.out.println I. And similar to other cases, we'll say if I equal to 5, continue. Now tell me, do we need to put I plus plus in the body of if like we had to do for continue with while, for example? Over here, we had to put I plus plus because if I equal to 5, it would continue, which means it would go back to the condition and the value of I would never increment from 5 to 6. But is it required in for? Well, let's see what happens if I run the code at this stage. That is without having I plus plus inside the body of if. So if I run it, what do I get? I get the exact same output that we got with while and do while. And why is this happening? This is happening because from 0 to 4, this condition would be false. So it would print 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the value of I would increment and would become 5. And then this condition would be true because 5 is less than 10, right? But then this condition is also true. So what would happen is if I equal to 5, which is true, it would continue. And when it continues, it goes to the next iteration. So in case of while, it would go from continue to the condition. But in case of for, it will go from continue to this expression, which is increasing the value of I by 1. And that is why we did not need to put I plus plus over here in the body of if. But if I still do it, what would happen? Well, first of all, I will be 5. It will get incremented to 6 and then it would continue. Because it continues, the control would reach over here at I plus plus. I will become 7 and it will then proceed from there. So we will get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and then 7, 8, 9 as the output. And that is exactly what we are getting. Now, let me quickly demonstrate continue with nested loop. So for that, I'll create a class. I'll say continue with nested loop. And here I'll say public static void main. And I'll say for int I equal to 0, I is less than 10, for example, I plus plus, and I'll print the value of I. Then I'll say for int j equal to 0, j is less than 10, j plus plus, and I'll print the value of j as well. Now, like break, continue could be a part of the inner for loop or the outer for loop. So let me put continue in the inner for loop first. I'll say if j equal to 5, continue. Now, if I run the code, we already know what the output would be, right? J would iterate from 0 to 9 and it will skip printing 5. So it will be I0 and then j from 0 to 4 and then 6, 7, 8, 9. Then I will be 1 and then the same thing would happen with the inner for loop. So if I run the code, this is what we are getting. I0 and j is 0 to 4 and then 6 to 9. Similarly, I is equal to 1, j is 0 to 4 and then 6 to 9 and all the way up to I is equal to 9, j 0 to 4 and then 6 to 9. And if I move this continue from here to the outer for loop, what would happen? And of course, I'll have to change this to if I equal to 5. That iteration where I is equal to 5 would be skipped. So we'll get I0 and then j from 0 to 9, then I1, j 0 to 9, all the way up to I4 and j 0 to 9. I5 will be skipped and then I6, j 0 to 9 and I7, j 0 to 9, and that's how it will continue. And if we take a look, we got I0, j 0 to 9, then I1, j 0 to 9, and if we scroll down, we'll see I3. We will also see I4, but we won't see I5. We will see I6. And at the very end, it will be I9. And in all the cases, we will get j 0 to 9. So what does this tell us? This tells us that like break, even continue would affect the loop it is inside. If it is inside the outer loop, it would affect the outer loop. If it is inside the inner loop, it would affect the inner loop. Of course, it can be in both the loops. Then the corresponding break or continue would affect the corresponding loop that it is inside. So this brings us to the end of the video. Summarizing, we talked about jump statements and we got to know that there are 3 jump statements in Java: break, continue, and return. We kept the discussion of return on hold because that would need the knowledge of methods in Java, and we've not yet discussed methods in Java, but we got to know how break and continue would work with while loop, do while loop, for loop, and also nested loop. And in nested loop, we got to know how it would behave when break or continue is present in the inner loop versus when it is present in the outer loop. So I hope I've been able to teach you something new and useful. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.